Brunello, welcome. Or should I say, benvenuto, Brunello.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's wonderful to have a fellow Italian with me, especially with such a beautiful name. So, Brunello, I read your introduction at the beginning of this podcast, and your experience is vast. Would you be able to summarize your expertise for us in simple terms?
Sure. So, I had experiences in academia, in policymaking, and in the private sector. So, and in these areas, I developed expertise, I would say, in five main topics. I would say one is macroeconomics, the other one is finance, geopolitics, political risk, and more recently, also cyber risk and strategy. And I kind of make a point of um, dealing with all these issues at the same time, and also um, for my organization, the Rosa and Roubini, but also at university, because I think it's important to combine academic findings, the latest developments in what the academics have learned and researched in these various fields, and then make them actionable, practical for the practitioners, for investors, for market participants, for business leaders. So we try to effectively combine academic expertise and practical implementations of these insights.
That's fantastic. You are speaking my language because whenever we're talking to clients and to speakers, I think more important than ever is the ability to implement on the information, to take action. There's no point just educating without being able to do something and make things better. It was wonderful. So, you've talked about all of these different areas: macroeconomics, finance, geopolitics, political risk, cyber risk, and strategy. Most people will talk about one and specialize in one, and you cover the whole lot, which is amazing. So, what are clients and audiences asking you to come and talk to them and help them with specifically? Are they saying we want help in all areas, or are they asking you for something specific?
I would say a bit of both. So first of all, there's sometimes the need of, as we say in the motto of our company, making sense of this world, because we are somehow submerged by this flow of information that comes from everywhere. And during the pandemics, we are sitting in our homes and in front of a computer 24/7 almost, and we are bombarded with news and speeches and insights from various sources, and it's extremely confusing for most people. So we try to put them in a sense, in a way that people can make sense of them, to create a narrative that allows business leaders, for example, to understand what the direction the world is taking, or market participants to understand where markets are going in all various asset classes, equities, fixed income, corporate bonds, commodities. So the first typical approach is, guys, there's so much going on. Try to give me a logic that kind of um, mm, gives a sense of all this information that I'm receiving. So that's one of the first typical questions. The other one is, okay, I more or less understand what's going on in general terms, but then I now need something extremely specific, whether it's in an asset class or a jurisdiction or a country or a particular situation, a policy issue that might have come up. And so in which case they come with a very, very narrow question, and we dig down on that specific topic with the vast network of contacts we got in academia, in the business world, in the market environment, in the policy making environment, and this vast network of people allows us to, I would say, um, uh, uh, double check what we would come up with, uh, with our own expertise and academic background and so on. So it's never just our own thinking, so to speak. We come up, of course, with our original ideas, but then we make sure that they are confronted with the reality the way it's presented, because otherwise it could be just a brilliant idea, but totally impractical, totally up in the air. Instead, it needs to be very well grounded. And so these are the two typical questions the clients and prospects come to us with.
Do you know what I loved? And I love that phrase, making sense of this world. You are so right. You're just completely overwhelmed with information. I imagine actually at the moment with so much uncertainty, you must be busier than ever. I'm sure of that. And what kind of audience levels are coming to you? Is it leaders? Is it particular sectors? Can you work across all ranges? Can you work at all levels? Or do you tend to specialize at board level?
So we tend to work with people at every level. To be clear, more recently, more at the higher level of organizations. But sometimes, even in a large asset management company, we do have relationship with the individual portfolio manager who wants to have his own view of the world and decide how to invest. Typically, we would be speaking with asset managers, hedge funds, pension funds, institutions, large corporations, mostly at board level. But again, sometimes it's not just a question of providing a broader view of what's going on in the world. Sometimes it's about implementing this view. And when you want to go into the implementation phase, then you need to go down the organization tree, so to speak, and so go where the executive directors are, or the directors and so on, to make sure that our ideas become fully implemented and are actioned, which is effectively the reason why people call us. It's not just to have an idea of what's going on, but okay, what should I do, how and when? And that's, when we go much deep down in the areas of expertise that I mentioned before.
So with your knowledge, I mean, this is a great opportunity for leaders to have you here, that you're going to ask a question that I think might be helpful and quite insightful for them. Is there something that leaders should be focusing on, organizations should be focusing on in the current climate? Could you give us some kind of insights?
Yeah, so I would say the following. The pandemic, we believe, has fundamentally changed the world and the way it works. The world would be radically different after this pandemic, I believe. Just to give you an idea, I think that China, in just over a decade, with two systemic crises that we have seen, the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and now the pandemic crisis of 2020, 2021. God knows whether it's going to be ended at the end of this year. We hope so. Well, China, in just over a decade, has made a jump of about 30 years and caught up with Western countries on a number of fronts, especially in terms of technological advancements. We used to remember the China that was copying our goods and exporting at a cheaper price all around the world. It used to be the manufacturer of the world and so on. That has now fundamentally changed. China, with its Agenda 2025, has decided to become the leading country in the 10 most technologically advanced sectors of the future, whether it is AI, whether it is automation, whether it is biotech, whether it is 3D printing, driverless cars, you name it. In all these sectors, they want to be the first country by 2025, which, by the way, is tomorrow, right? So if that's what's going on, then now there's a big responsibility on Western countries, and particularly the US and Europe, to decide what they want to do, what they want to be. And now we are in Europe, and it's a divided Europe now, as we know. I'm speaking from London after Brexit, and there's a continental Europe, there's the EU that goes on. They need to find a way of cooperating with each other. And Europe needs to decide whether it wants to grow up and finally finishing this integration process, or continue this integration process that started somehow with Brexit. These are fundamental questions that will have huge implications for all business leaders, because they will have to decide where to invest in the next few years, not just in terms of technology, for example, or sectors, but also in terms of jurisdiction. Should I invest in Eastern Europe, or should I invest in Britain? Or maybe it's better to move to Asia, since it seems to be the new, the leading part of the world. So what I think business leaders should think about is your organization proof, future proof or future ready? So are you going to be able to make your organization standing and succeeding in this new world after the pandemic, where, most importantly, the distinction between physical space and cyberspace is going to be super thin, almost imperceptible. Lots of things that used to happen in the real world, so to speak, it will happen in the cyberspace. And so this is, I would say, the area in which business leaders, market participants, and so on, even political leaders, I think, should start seriously thinking about.
That's fascinating. It really is fascinating. And now I completely understand why you said you started working in the area of cyber risk and strategy, because, of course, as you said, that the way you've described it, that wafer-thin barrier between the physical and cyber world, and the fact that we all need to embrace this cyber world, which is, as you know, been vast accelerated with the pandemic. I'm shocked and surprised by the ambition of China 2025. As you say, it's tomorrow. Some of us are going to get left behind, I think. It's fascinating stuff. So tell me a bit. I mean, anyone who's watching on video can see that you've got a very professional background, and you've got the names Rosa and Roubini in the background. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about your organisation, Rosa Roubini, why you founded it? Tell us a little bit about the work you do, and what is it that you're trying to do in that organisation?
Sure. So Nouriel and I have been working together for the last 8+ years, I think, in various organizations. So, and this is, I would say, the latest incarnation in which we decided to put together our names and our expertise to direct clients in these areas that I mentioned at the very beginning of our talk. It's not just two of us, of course. We have a number of collaborators all around the world, because I really wanted to have people boots on the ground, so people that can tell me what's going on in the area of their work. So it's not just a few people in an office in London try to make, to figure out what's going on. That I don't think that model works anymore. You really need to have people boots on the ground in various areas of the world, from Asia to continental Europe, the Middle East, North America, the UK, of course. So they can feed information to us from where things are happening. And these people are all very senior, and the way we select, and they are handpicked, we literally choose one by one who works with us, because they need to have a few, I would say, characteristics that are not so common. First of all, we want them to have a very broad background in academic terms, policy making, and private sector, so that they are well-rounded and they understand things from all perspectives, from all angles. It's not just going to be one particular angle and then it's completely useless for others. You might have an amazing academic, but cannot speak with market participants, for example. What's the point? Or you might have a fantastic former policymaker, but maybe his academic record or exposure is not deep enough. And so market participants might not get exactly the information and insights they want. So effectively, everybody working with us is senior, has expertise or experience in these areas that I mentioned, academia, product sector, and policy makings, that are grounded in various parts of the world. And each of them has an area of expertise. Somebody mostly commodities, for example, somebody North America, somebody else is asset allocation. So when all this information from all various parts of the world, from all various types of expertise is fed to us, then we are then able to make sense of the world, as the motto says. And this is compounded in some flagship publications that we have on a quarterly basis, such as the Strategic Asset Allocation or the Global Outlook, and then a series of other publications that we do on a regular basis, whether it's on central banks or on political risk, geopolitical development, cyber risk, and so on and so forth. So that's how the organization works. And we believe that there's lots of value in speaking to us, not just reading what we write, because these are all pieces of a jigsaw, but you then want to have, somebody summarizing those views to get a much fuller sense of what's going on.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. I love the fact that you've got people actually in place who are feeding the information. That's really, really important. I'm going to put you on the spot. We're friends. I think I can ask you this question, and I think you'll tell me quite succinctly and truthfully. I want to know your track record. I want to know the successes you guys have had in the past. So I'm putting you on the spot here, Brunello. Can you share some of your track record and past successes?
Sure. Well, I would say there are some things that really define people's career. And we all know that Nouriel became worldwide famous when he correctly predicted the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, starting from the housing market bust that happened in the US. But then he was able to predict what would happen subsequently. You might remember at the beginning, people thought, it's a localized thing. It's going to, subprime market is small. It's never going to affect anybody. And then you know what happened. The entire global financial system was on the verge of a meltdown. So from that kind of view and perspective, we start building, of course, our organizations. I myself was at that time still in academia, and I was studying at the time Minsky and his financial instability hypothesis, when it was considered radical, heretic, totally heterodox, totally outside mainstream. People didn't even believe that these things could potentially happen, and there was an entire history of financial crisis that just people completely forgot about. And then, using that kind of approach, the Minsky approach effectively says there's fragility and there are shocks. And when shocks hit a fragile system, then you have a crisis. And this is how, in September 2018, Nouriel and I wrote articles in the FT, in Project Syndicate, in various outlets, where we said, look, in 2020, we said, there will be a global recession and a financial crisis. And we proved to be correct. Now, people say, did you predict the pandemic? Not the pandemic per se, because we said conditions in a year and a half would be ready for whatever shocks emerge to hit a fragile system, and there will be a serious, we call it the mother and father of all crises, because we could see that there was huge bubble forming as a result of the response of the global financial crisis. And this is exactly what happened. That shock could have been endogenous, as it was in 2008, housing market, or could be exogenous to the economic system, as it was in 2020, the pandemic, a healthcare shock, but it's the framework that really matter. And then the policy response, and that's an important thing. In 2008, 2009, we said, you policymakers, you want to go very deep into the monetary policy response, very shallow on fiscal policy. This is a mistake. You should change it. Again, consider heterodox, completely out of, mainstream and so on. And it took forever to get there until eventually we got there and the solution was eventually found. During this crisis, that policy recipe was adopted. We started fiscal policy first and monetary policy accompanying fiscal policy accommodation. And yet we are saying the policy response, economic was right, but maybe the overall policy response, it wasn't totally correct. The healthcare policy response in most countries has been totally wrong, or late, or insufficient. And that's why this crisis that has been resolved in 6-9 months in China is dragging on and on and on in Western countries, because the healthcare policy response in most cases was wrong. So it will take years for the world, and historians will look back and say, yeah, maybe we should have done things differently. Okay, but our job is spot the issue today for tomorrow, and hopefully for lessons to be learned, including by ourselves, of course.
Wow, that's amazing. I sort of wish I don't know, do I wish I'd known this before from you so that I was prepared? I don't know. But wow, I mean, goodness gracious.
Let me give an example. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
The pandemic is coming in waves. We published a piece on the 3 waves of the Spanish flu on the 24th of March 2020. At the beginning of the first wave, we said there would be 3 waves at least, and people didn't listen. People said, you're pessimistic. It's Dr. Doom yet again. No, it's a question of knowing history, knowing what's going on, having expertise, even in areas that are you're not areas of expertise to begin with, but then you drill down and try to get the answer that people will eventually want. And if people had listened about the second wave starting in the autumn, they would not have reopened as much as they did in Europe during the summer. And now we wouldn't be yet in another lockdown. So that's what I'm giving a practical example how to lead, thinking and policy making.
Okay, people need to listen. No. People need to listen to you, Brunello. So finally, I could talk to you all day. It's amazing. These are areas that are just absolutely fascinating. What's next?
So I was saying, the world will really look radically different after this pandemic. China has made a huge jump, has gotten a lot of position, the global ranking, I would say, versus the US in particular, his strategic competitor. We cannot hide anymore behind this sort of cooperation / competition. It's now clear that China is a strategic rival of the US. We all want the world to be peaceful, but the reality in the ground is that political leaders think slightly different, think about how to advance their country position over time. And so this is going to be the dominant theme for the next decades, not just here, decades. And so, again, the US will have to decide what to do in this new world, and Europe will have to decide what to do. Economists will have a huge amount of debt to digest, all this debt that has been issued to fight the pandemic. And the role of central banks will change radically because for the most part, they will have to monetize this debt and make it digested through the system, so to speak. And therefore, market participants and business leaders will have to make the asset allocation decisions or business investment decisions based on this fundamentally changed environment. Again, as we said before, the pandemic has shown that the boundary between the physical world and the cyber world is very thin. And most of the actions that used to take place in the real world, let's call it, will now take place in the cyberspace, whether it's public actions or public actions. Even geostrategic advancements nowadays are happening online, so to speak. Is the big theme of cyber warfare, the big theme of digital sovereignty, as people call it. So in this new cyberspace, where do I put the boundaries? Who's going to be the army that defends these boundaries? There used to be tanks and missiles and so on, but in the cyberspace, you need new armies and new soldiers. So who are they? Who is investing in them? And so these are all, I would say, these are all the things that I believe will happen in the world in the next decades. And then these are the things that I will be very, very happy to talk about in my speeches.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brunello. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you to you, Maria. And I'm going to be at people's disposal and when and if they want to.